Right, so a little bit about Diversity Resource International. This is the slide where I wasn't going to talk on, but so hopefully I know a lot about Diversity Resource International. So Diversity Resource International was started about 20 years ago this year, and it was started by these two very, very influential women, Dr. Yao and Miss Melbrecht and I think, their main intention really was to engage communities, community development, empower those communities, and it's still the same thing today, but with a research focus as well. So, and the primary focus was around developing, engaging ethnic minority communities. But as DRI has grown up, it's actually grown up to also include marginalized communities. And I think this week you will hear a lot about intersectionality, co-production, involvement, engagement, and those are the reasons why DRI has taken that route to say that, we are all intersecting, we are all connected, and somehow we need to learn to work together. And yeah, and I think one of the other beautiful things around DRI is that we work with local government, so we work with the local councils, and also from a national perspective, we work with charities or organizations that are focused on, I think, fighting health and social care inequalities as well. But for me, my passion really is working with the grassroots communities. So when I talk about grassroots communities, I'm talking about community-led organizations, community-led initiatives, individually led projects, programs, and individually led ideas. But I think all and the community-based research aspects of that. So there is a lot that goes on at Diversity Resource International, and like I said, I will be weaving in and out around that. So I think, as I mentioned today, I mean, like this week, you will hear a lot about co-production. And one of the things around the reason why I think co-production is something of a buzzword or something that people really find attractive is that the intention is around creating equal partnerships. And within the research context, these are researchers working alongside community members. And the benefits are obviously quite immense when done right. So for researchers, yes, we get on these projects, work with the community members, and we have the community voices in our research. And then for communities, they feel engaged, they feel involved, they feel, well, empowered as well to the to being engaged through co-production and research. And I think just a simple, I think as it is a definition, if it may be, that within co-production, it is a means to aligning academic goals with community needs for the social impact. So there has to be a change, and it's not just around, yes, we conducted some research, but what then happens with that research when you've involved the communities. So just want to move on slightly from co-production and research and move on to the power or co-production, working with engagement again, of community-based research and community engagement, community involvement, community research. And again, in an ideal world, this research should and must be transformative in terms of the impact that the research has, but also on the individuals, on the communities, but also on the researchers, and also around the quality of the research. But as I said, I am speaking from someone who is both community facing or coming from the communities, our communities, but also as a researcher. And I've been critical a lot. And this has been something that over the years I've not shied away from, that the traditional models of research are again, going back to the title of this talk, really, we as academics stand in our high towers, in our ivory towers. We are isolated from the communities, and the communities also feel isolated from the research process. They feel isolated from the research results as well. And really, and this is something that I've challenged for a long time. So I'll give you an example of the traditional researcher where we go out supposedly into the communities, we supposedly work with the communities, we gather the data, we get out of those communities, go back to our screens, sit down, type something, and send it off to a publication. Yay, we get hits around. Our publication is actually being read by a lot of other researchers. And then we get invited to these conferences, these lavish conferences where we present our findings. And yes, if we drink champagne, then yes, we drink champagne, give ourselves a pat on the back, but it almost feels divorced from the reality, because I think what the shift has been, or what the shift should be, is that the research process should actually be around building bridges with the communities. So the academia, the communities, but also the practitioners. And I think just looking at the room today, we do have clinicians, we have policymakers, we have community members, we have academics as well. So how then do we build those bridges? How then do we engage in meaningful discussions, conversations, and also research that actually is impactful, but not only impactful, but also is meaningful and also provides sustainable solutions to the communities. And also, I think we are also trying to uh, demystify what academia is, and also trying to involve members of the communities as researchers. So I think one of the buzz terms around going around is around community research. And it's something, again, like I said, I've been very, very passionate about for years. And somehow it seems to be the talk of the town. So how then do we actually engage the community researchers in terms of training, in terms of being involved in analysis of the research, but also the dissemination. So it's no longer the academics going to these fancy conferences and saying, this is what I did, but it's more around working with the communities and saying, this is what we did together as a team. And that again is probably one of my main intentions of talking to you today. But you may ask yourself, well, we've heard this before, and we've seen people like you before telling us exactly the same thing. How do we do it? And apologies. And how do we do this? And I just wanted to introduce something today, and it is something that I will term, or we will term, the Empowering Migrant Bridges, Active Research and Knowledge. So EMBaRK, simply. I know acronyms are the order of the day, so I will continue with that. But I, in terms of how it came about, I was working as part of my PhD project, and one of the things that we talked about with the female migrants that I was actually working with, and the community organizations that I was working with, was that, well, we need to agree on something, on how we are going to work. We need to actually have real expectations for each other. What do you want from us? And what do we want from you? And so we came up with this co-designed framework that that worked as a guide, but also almost worked as a cushion for if things were to go wrong, how then would we actually write things? How then would we have meaningful adult conversations? How then would we actually move forward? And The reason why you have this, it's a yacht, the cruise ship, yes, but the original formation of this framework was actually based on uh, a simple wind-powered sailing boat. And the idea behind that was as the migrant journey, just like the migrant journey, it's the research process is a journey. So within our framework, we envisioned that we are actually embarking on a boat journey. We have a starting point and we have a vision of where we want to get at as a research team. So the female migrants, the community-led organizations, and the academic researchers. How then were we to get to the end point? So this metaphor is around, well, at the start of this journey, what do you do? What are the preparations? What do you need to do to prepare? First of all, within this framework, it's around agreeing roles within the team. And I'm saying the team because it's no longer just me as an academic and them as community researchers or community members, but we are now working together as a team. So preparation, who is going to be the captain of the boat, for example? Who is going to be responsible for powering or, when there is no winds to blow this boat away or into our direction, who is going to be manning the oars, for example, and provisions as well. The food as a metaphor in the sense that what do we do and what do we have that will enable us to actually have the strength, the inspiration around continuing this journey. And trust. Trust is, I think, a word that, again, you may hear throughout this week, but trust is something that I will say throughout this discussion later on and this presentation, that there has to be trust from the onset. So we trust with each other. I mean, like again on the boat journey metaphor, you have to trust the people that you're in the boat with, and you have to trust people's decision making. You have to trust people's intentions, but also people have to trust you. And going back to more or less the real world, trust is being built between the academics. The academics have to trust the community members about the knowledge that they have. They have to trust the community members that sensitive discussions that are being made are actually remaining within that space. So there's a lot about trust, but trust is not just one way. The community members, the community researchers, the practitioners in the room also have to trust the academic as well. What are you going to do with this information that we've given you? It's not just about our sensitive information, but it's also about the information that over the years, over conversations, we have gained this information. What are you going to do with our community's information? And again, around adaptability and continuous evaluation, I think when things go wrong, things can never go perfect. And I think, like today, for example, my co-researcher couldn't make it, so I had to adapt a little. And so, but adaptability, it requires preparation. And and there has to be a form of continuous evaluation. Are we doing it right? Are we going in the same direction that we said we we're going? How far are we from the shore? Should we go back and get more supplies, or should we keep on going further? But are we close? Is there an end in sight? And what happens to the time when we land, or when we get to the finish point, or when we get to the results section? What then? What do we do? So there is that continuous evaluation, which means an exchange of information, constant change of information. And within this framework, we use the obviously co-production models. And I think, again, I won't talk much around co-production and engagement and involvement because these are things that will be talked about a lot during the week. But what I will say is that in terms of some of the models that we used, all were are based around equality as collaborators within the research team, but also ensuring that people's voices are actually being heard, but also respected. So there's a lot around respect. And just moving forward, and these are just brief benefits of this process. And again, I'm saying benefits of this process because this is something that we tried and it worked. So within my PhD project, for example, the female migrants, especially I'll talk about the female migrants that I worked with. These were asylum seekers, refugees, and economic migrants as well, and academic migrants, people that came to the UK to study as well. And they found that within this process, especially around building trust, that they wanted to engage. They really, really wanted to contribute. And not only that, but also there was a sense of I know a lot of people would not like me saying empowerment, but there really was this sense of I actually am doing this because one, I can, but also two, sometimes it was the fact that I've been given this opportunity, which sadly for a lot of them, they had not been given the opportunity or provided this opportunity. And again, it's around also for me, I found that I had to also constantly evaluate myself in terms of my position as a male researcher working with female migrants, working with vulnerable populations, working with people that sometimes were not at all um, knowledgeable about academic processes and practices. So this is something that also I felt empowered also by the community members because from their perspective, they trusted me, I trusted them, and for me gaining that trust meant a lot from a professional and a personal perspective as well. And we can't ignore people's backgrounds. So although today here it says cultural sensitivity, it can be any other of their protected characteristics, for example, but also it can be situational because things change. So today I'm working with members of the community that appear like they're vulnerable, but tomorrow it may be the case that through other processes, if it's this process, or it is through life changes, they are in a better off position. I need to be respectful of that. I need to actually ensure that their needs are also being met. And just lastly, on this point, I think transparency, again, going back to trust, is really, really important. And the issue around accountability and shared ownership of the research process. And this last bit, I think I will highlight because going back to the ivory tower, going back to the patting ourselves on the back as academics to say, hey, we've actually done a good piece of work, and forgetting the community members that contributed, forgetting the people that you interviewed, forgetting the people that actually helped you engage some of these communities, forgetting to acknowledge these people within the research process. So, one of the agreements within this process is that this research is co-owned. And the early days of my research, I was actually told, this is your PhD, it shouldn't be around other people. And I thought, well, real co-production, real meaningful engagement requires that I actually share this journey with others. And I'm actually glad I did. And one of the things is, that I actually ensured was that in terms of research publications, they are named as co-authors where they've contributed significantly. And also where there has not been the case that they may not have contributed to writing the paper, they have contributed to actually being a critical friend to a paper. So what do I mean? So there is this aspect of lived experience commentaries, which I'm hoping everyone in this room is aware of, but if not, this is something that I'm hoping that perhaps, especially the academics in this room, will take forward. Is that, again, traditionally, we go into these communities, we gather the data, we engage them brilliantly. They provide this data to us, and then we write a paper, and then we publish it. And then, like I said, we may be invited to some conferences. However, there is almost that lack of going back to the communities and saying, you said this to us, this is what we understood of how your circumstances are, and this is what we wrote. Did we write the right thing? Did we actually, our conclusions, do they actually make sense to you? And also, what are your thoughts around the way we approached you? What are your thoughts around the way we worked with you? What are your thoughts around the outcome of this study? So, with a lived experience commentary, you actually go back to the members of the community, you show them the paper that you've written, and they are meant to be a critical friend, and they have worked really, really well in terms of one, actually bridging that gap between just academia and but also involving the community within recommendations, for example. And I can give you one or two examples, not from my work, but from other work where some of the recommendations that were people actually ended up talking about were not from the main academic paper, but some of the recommendations that were actually being looked at were from the lived experience commentary, and where the members of the public or people with lived experience of a mental health condition, for example, actually ended up suggesting other ways of, for example, engaging communities or other ways of actually ensuring that treatment options are actually, or support options for community-based people, individuals, are actually done in a way where people actually find meaning to them. So there is power in that, and this is something that I will definitely encourage you all today. And so, one thing again over the years that's been the case for me is that I've been to countless workshops, really, really countless workshops, and I've been told this is how you do co-production, this is how you do engagement, this is how you do involvement, this is how you work with members of the community or community-led organizations, and this is what you do as an academic. And one thing that I think has been lacking is, well, thank you, but give us real stories, give us real, information around how do these things happen? How did you do them? Not around this is how you should be doing. So my co-presenter today was going to be talking from the community perspective. So allow me to walk out of the room and come back as a community member, a member of the community, and from there is the Sussex Research and Engagement Network, and so in short, it's called the REN. And I'm just going to talk briefly about it because this is something that I've seen has worked in terms of bridging that gap between academia, bridging that gap between clinicians, and bridging that gap between community-led organizations, and bridging that gap between and also the community researchers. So it is funded by the National Health Service, the NHS, and initially it was looking at health inequalities, and so now it's expanded because it's actually worked quite well. But let's talk about a Sussex uh, program rather than just a national program. And so within the region, the Sussex Research Engagement Network sought to engage diverse communities, and some of these communities included LGBTQI communities, ethnic minority-led communities, voluntary sector, organizations, and also I think what you would call, I'm trying not to use terminology that is difficult to understand. So just organizations that enable other organizations to actually do the work they do within Sussex. And this was an opportunity. Oh, and also let me not forget one of the most important I guess, players or partners within the Sussex Research Engagement Network is the local Sussex NHS Trust as well. So they are involved and they are more or less leading. But also, they are also the academics within this research engagement network, including the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. So, what is it? So, there is an opportunity for information, skills, and knowledge exchange. So, it's not just around academics coming into this space and saying these are the skills that you should be having as community members to enable meaningful research, but it's also around community-led organizations. So, who can actually partner with academia to co-deliver some of the training. So in this case, the community researcher training was not done by academics from the university. This was done by community-led organizations. And I'm not going to be mentioning any names today. I didn't ask people's permission, but I'm sure my co-researcher had. So apologies, I'm not going to mention any names today, but the community-led organizations are the ones that actually led on the community researcher training, alongside obviously the academics as well. And around the involvement process, the community-led organizations are involved alongside the NHS and the academics in leadership positions. So they're also empowered and encouraged and also heavily involved in being co-applicants for future further funding. So this is one very, very good example of how I would say the community, academia, and also, I guess, clinicians or the local NHS has actually worked together and come up with a very, very successful research program where community members have now then gone and interviewed their fellow community members around what is important for them. So I think one of the things was around what is your understanding around research and especially around health research. And that's actually in itself brought up a lot of questions and concerns that people were tired, first of all, of just being interviewed and nothing happening, but also people felt that, well, our communities are marginalized. So some of the most vulnerable members of of Sussex really came out and said, well, we feel marginalized, we feel unheard, we feel ignored, we feel like no one's taking us seriously. So this has been one really successful program, and it is ongoing, and it's really open to all academics, all community members, and all community organizations, really. So, but it's all about money, I guess. So it's all about capacity as well. And from an academic perspective, I think, again, allow me to walk out of the room and come back as an academic. I will talk about my PhD. The reason why I will talk about my PhD is because a wise person told me that I am more knowledgeable about what I'm talking about than anyone else in this room. So I'll talk about my PhD. So my PhD involved a mixed methods approach. What does that mean? So it wasn't just about interviews, it wasn't just about writing a systematic review, but also it involved big data, so clinical records. And how did I involve or how did I work with female migrants and community-led organizations? So from the start of the journey when I actually got approved for my PhD, I initially did a lot, and I'm saying a lot of community engagement. I wanted to know what organizations were out there. I wanted to know what communities were out there. I wanted to know if people had actually been approached in a way that's actually felt genuine as well. So I had a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions, and probably one or two disagreements. And this, I think the disagreement was, well, you're a male researcher, and why should you be researching female migrants' issues? And this was not from the community, by the way. This was from fellow academics. The communities were very, very supportive. So the community-led organizations that were supporting the female migrants were really, really supportive. And so my research questions were informed by them, and my ethics application, although it was quite difficult, as ethics is difficult within university settings. However, it was formed by them. It was formed through our discussions, and I was really, really grateful because they pointed out things that myself and my PhD supervisors missed out. So, and terminology, for example, I'm not your traditional researcher because I don't use big words. I use everyday language. Well, I try to anyways. But every now and then I like to show off. Maybe that's why I would use one of the big words every now and then. But it's very rare. My presentations are always simple because I believe I'm talking to people that don't have the time for people to show off. And so in the systematic review, that was my first study, and it looked at barriers and facilitators to accessing support from their mental health. And although it was in Europe, so I was looking at literature or studies that have already been conducted. I was really, really grateful that the first question that was actually asked was, well, why don't you ask the female migrants? Why don't you actually look at what stops people from accessing support? And that's where my systematic review question came from. But then with the interviews, again, we worked on the interview questions, and initially I had actually wanted to just go and say, well, what are your barriers in terms of accessing mental health support within Kent, Surrey, and Sussex? But the female migrants that I was working with, well, let me use the word co-production group because that involved academics, clinicians, and female migrants and those supporting them. The co-production group came back and says, well, yes, you want to know about their access and support, but what are their views? What are their understanding of what mental health or is? Mental health to them could be mental illness, but mental health could for them could be mental health or mental wealth. So that was really quite important for me to actually get that perspective. And it worked really well because when we did interview the our participants, uh, one of the things that they appreciated was we were not trying to come out to them as these professionals with these big terminologies, but we're actually speaking to them in everyday language. And so my team, my core researchers also were involved in the interview process. And so, yes, it was a PhD project, but my co-interviewed interviewers actually helped me out in terms of interviewing. And this was quite important, especially working with these really vulnerable groups that perhaps some situations really required a female interviewer rather than a male researcher. So, and in terms of the data analysis or looking at the information that we had, the co-production group also actually helped me come up with a framework or a way of how I could then analyze the data. And as I said, they provided lived experience commentaries for my systematic review, but also they provided a lived experience commentary. And I'm not sure there's anything like that out there. They provided me with a lived experience commentary of the whole PhD process. So these are people I've worked with over the years. How can their voice be ignored in the final master document. So their voices were in there, and I'm just aware of time. So yes, so that is something that I would encourage anyone starting or even finishing their PhD. Yes, you can involve their voices. Yes, you can actually get their voices heard by them writing a commentary around the process of them being involved in your PhD project. And I think it's enriching, really it is. And just a few practical strategies, I think, for any researchers in the room, but also for clinicians. This is something that is everyday, I think, common sense, really. But I was told common sense is not that common. So here I am saying this. So there is, you have to invest time in building relationships. And as I mentioned, trust is two-way. So community members, community contributors, community organizations also have to invest in that relationship. And they also have to have or build, gain that trust as well with the academic. And also, it's around active listening, and perspectives and priorities may differ initially, but then there are always ways of identifying mutual goals, and that is through continued conversations, engagement. And as I mentioned earlier on, be flexible, and you have to be adaptable. You have to the dynamics of the community, because we are living in an ever evolving world, and also our communities are diverse, but also our communities change due to sometimes socio-political situations. So there has to be that form of adaptability and flexibility. And again, going back to everything else around building relationships, around communication and transparency, it's really, really, really important. But it's not just the academic, it's also, I will stress this, it's also around transparency as community members as well. We can't put the responsibility on academics and forget that we are actually part of this process, and we also need to be transparent, and we need to communicate well. So again, this is just going back to me. I think I'm trying to hammer home this point. We need to acknowledge the people that we've worked with. Many have sacrificed a lot. Many have probably decided not to work with potentially better projects, bigger projects, much more funded projects, but they've decided to work with you. So acknowledge that sacrifice and value those community contributions. Right, and just on the last thing, really, is around, yeah, we can't ignore that in academia, well, in life, really, we have to work with time, and so just ensuring that our academic timelines are aligning with the community needs, and not over-promising, really never over-promising. And again, this is more focused towards community members, community contributors, um, group dynamics, really, really essential. And you're not doing anyone any favors if you don't address things going wrong. And sometimes you can have people that are loud, disruptive within your research process. It's around how do you manage those group dynamics. And so I've been fortunate enough that it's been manageable in my project, but I've been on so many projects where that has been the biggest issue. So addressing that in an open way as well. And please, by all means, use this bot metaphor, the embark process, where you are embarking on a journey, agreeing on what supplies, what do you need before you even start the journey, but also ensuring that there is responsibility. And also, if things go wrong, there's always some way of navigating um, the whole journey, but also reaching at the end, what next is, is one of the most important questions. And Um, we can't sacrifice academic rigor. And what do I mean by that? We can't sacrifice, or rather, we can't ignore that we will be judged, our work will be judged by other academics. So, peer reviewed, for example. So, it has to be within academic um, quality, but also it has to be research that is actually offers something, not just research just for the sake of research. All right. Okay. Sorry. So, and just this is more or less like questions for you, really. What is the future of community research? What is the future of involving communities? And we are in an ever-evolving world, and so academia and community engagement are forever evolving. And but we do know and recognize that there are long-term benefits and should be of co-produced research. And for any policymakers in the room, I think this is something that you should be asking about, like, well, what is the impact of this engagement? Not of the research question, but what is the long-term impact of this engagement? And I think a question to everyone really in this room in terms of you being involved in research as a primary researcher or you being involved in research as a member of the community, what happens then to when the research ends? Is that it? What happens to the results? What happens to you? And what happens to those relationships that you've built? And I'm hoping that the engagement processes are actually, well, the start of building real, meaningful involvement, engagement, but also relationships in research and just being human, I guess. So I just wanted to acknowledge some of the, I guess, organizations, both academic and also community-led, that have worked on my PhD projects, but also that are working with Diversity Resource International in some form or another. And thank you all, and I really, really hope this has been helpful.